Peace, everyone. This is African Esquire TV. I'm your host, Tony Cherie. Before I get started, please do like, comment, and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. In addition, I'd ask that you add yourself to my Telegram channel to receive updates from me from a decentralized platform. Also, please add yourself to my channel on Odyssey. Odyssey is a lot like Facebook, a lot like YouTube, but it is a decentralized platform similar to Telegram. So these are important platforms to build. The funny thing about the global white power structure is that they learn to adapt, and they look for ways that they can maintain power even whenever the people are going to be the ones losing out on a mass scale. So they're constantly listening to us. They're constantly trying to adjust themselves, adjust their position, because they want this whole global order to continue forever. They do not want there to be a day where Africans are free, Africans are liberated, Africans say we don't need you or want you. That's the ultimate threat to them. And so because of that, if you listen for a while, you'll start doing things that seem to be victories, for the people. And some people will be happy about it. Some people will cheer for it. Some people will say this is progress. Others of people will say that this is a trick. And when you see a trick, you should not fall for it. You should run from it. And so that's really what we're going to talk about today. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard Namibia was offered $1.3 billion from the German government. Namibia being an African country which has suffered insurmountably under colonialism, like all of Africa, obviously. And in particular, there was a genocide that happened, a genocide that is so relevant to our modern experience, of genocide that gets overlooked because, of course, Africans dying, that's not something that people care about. And the people of Namibia have been very loud in saying, listen, we are a people just like your Europeans. Whenever you committed genocide on the Jews, you had no problem recognizing that. So be consistent, recognize what you did to us. You paid reparations to the Jews, pay reparations to us. Sounds like it makes sense, right? I mean, if we're living inside of a world where everyone is equal, why would you only do something for one people and you let the other people essentially, you try to erase that history and you try to forget that it ever happened. So this has been the call of the people inside of Namibia for a very long time. And it seems like this is kind of reaching ahead, because now there's pressure actually to not just recognize the genocide, but to pay back to the people what's owed. Now, I don't want to start this story with the Namibia genocide. I think this story in more recent times would probably begin with Emmanuel Macron confessing essentially the French role inside of Rwanda. So we're going to start right there.
Rwanda's relations with France have warmed up after a quarter of a century of tensions. French President Emmanuel Macron visited his Rwandan counterpart, Paul Kagame, in the capital Kigali. 27 years earlier, Kagame's Rwandan Patriotic Front, or RPF, was fighting a civil war. France backed its enemy, the government of Juvenal Habyarimana. Many officials in that government organised the massacres of ethnic Tutsis and moderate Hutus. Kagame subsequently said France was responsible for genocide. And so Macron began his tour at Kigali's Genocide Memorial.
France did not understand that by wanting to block a regional conflict or a civil war, it stood de facto by a genocidal regime.
The memorial documents the role that France played in the genocide and the events leading up to it. The caption of this image talks about the military support that the French government gave to the regime of President Habyarimana. The way that the history is told is very much according to the RPF's version of events, and that's a narrative that Macron and the government of France have now come to accept. But that wasn't always the case. The French government accused the RPF of shooting down Habyarimana's French crewed plane in April 1994, triggering the genocide. It also accused the RPF of massacring Hutus. They're both things that Kagame and the RPF have always vehemently denied, and France has now stopped talking about. Macron stopped short of actually apologising for France's role in the genocide. That kind of message would likely have been attacked by the far right at home. But what he said was more than enough for President Kagame.
His words were something more valuable than an apology. they were the truth.
In its earlier years, Kagame's government switched Rwanda's schools from French language to English, joined the Commonwealth and launched a national cricket team. The US and UK were in here. France was out.
So this is just, I believe, 2 weeks ago, Macron asked Rwanda to forgive France over the 1994 genocide rule. Speaking at the Genocide Memorial in Rwanda's capital, Kigali, he said that France had not heeded warning of impending carnage and for too long valued silence over examination of the truth. But France had not been an accomplice in the killings, Mr. Macron said. Rwanda's leader praised his speech. President Paul Kagame, this is y'all's guy, remember? His words were something more valuable than an apology. They were truth. He called it an act of tremendous courage. Okay. In March, a French expert, and this is why, what do you mean by courage? A French expert found that France, under the late President Francois Mitterrand, had borne heavy and overwhelming responsibility for the genocide, but had not been complicit. The report said that France had been blind to genocide preparations. Macron says, I hereby humbly and with respect stand by your side. I come to recognize the extent of our responsibilities. He just said we're not responsible, but now he's admitting his responsibilities. The Hutu elites ruled Rwanda when the genocide took place in April through June of 1994, but they were later ousted by the Tutsi-led Rwandan Patriotic Front under Paul Kagame. Mitterrand had close ties to former Rwandan President Juvenal Habyarimana, a Hutu. The killers who stalked the swamps, the hills, the churches did not have the face of France. France was not an accomplice, Macron said. But he said that in 1994, France did not understand that by wanting to block a regional conflict or civil war, it stood de facto by a genocidal regime. Now, this is very interesting, obviously. So France's government, they're coming forward after a report has been released. The report has been released and it says that, hey, France literally knew that this was happening. They were continuing to be friends, they said, with the government inside of Rwanda, and they were funding that government in Rwanda. So their dollars were supporting this regime that ultimately led to the deaths of many of our brothers and sisters. Now, he goes to say that, hey, we're not responsible, but we're sorry. And that's enough for Paul Kagame to call him brave, to say that, oh, thank you. This is something that's the truth, he said. This is the truth. And we get to let France get a pass now. We get to look the other way and we get to go on. That's the narrative that's being spun. This is what's going towards the European perspective as far as now their hands are clean. And that's why I really didn't, for another reasons, but that's one of the reasons I really didn't like what Paul Kagame did this, because to act like this was brave, this is calculated. It's very calculated to see that this report was released. This report was released during the same time where a lot of anti-French sentiment is going around Africa. And rather than say, you know what, you guys should not just fess up, but put up, because a lot of people lost, a lot of people are still affected by the genocide. He says your apology was truthful and I'm done demanding anything further. This is the people's champion for some of you, Paul Kagame. But this set the stage, I think, for what we've seen what's happening with Rwanda, because we're starting to see that the colonial powers, and it's not just, these two countries, it's really all over the world. They're under pressure. They're under pressure from African people. African people are sharing information via the internet. We're sharing information via our organizations. We're sharing information. We're learning information like we never learned before. And because of that, the imperialists have to find a way to mask their power and do so in a way that's going to pacify their resistance. This is what they have to do. So everything about this was calculated. And we should also understand everything about what's happening with the Namibia genocide is also calculated. So let's look and see what the Germans did.
As their land and cattle were being taken from them, the Herero people took a stand against their German colonizers at the start of the 20th century. What came next still haunts their descendants more than a century later. Between 1904 and 1908, the Germans tried to exterminate the Nama and Herero people. executing thousands and driving other tribes' people into the desert. Survivors were used as slave labor in concentration camps. Around 100,000 people were killed in this genocide. Germany has finally accepted responsibility.
We will now officially call these events what they were from today's perspective, a genocide. In doing so, we are also acknowledging our historical responsibility. In the light of Germany's historical and moral responsibility, we will ask Namibia and the descendants of the victims for forgiveness.
Berlin's agreed to provide $1.3 billion in the next 3 decades in the form of development projects. Some Herero call it a betrayal of their ancestors because the deal did not include a direct payment of compensation.
This has nothing to do with reparation. They call it not reparation, but reconciliation. So this is a kind of a new art of development aid. And development aid goes to this government. And this government of Namibia, as we know, is a corrupt government. And this money will never reach the Nama and the Herero people, especially the dissidents of these two nations. That's why we say no to this reconciliation. We want reparation. We want to talk directly to the German government.
Half of the Nama people and 80% of the Herero were killed. Much of Namibia's arable land is still owned by descendants of German settlers. Some could stand to benefit from the announcement, as money will be allocated for land purchases and vocational training. Namibia's government says the move is a step in the right direction. To heal, we have to learn to live with the scars. But for descendants of those who were either killed or marched into the Kalahari Desert to starve to death, it's a wound that may never heal.
Germany recognizes a colonial-era massacre in Namibia as genocide. Germany will ask for forgiveness from Namibia for the immense suffering caused during the massacres in 1904 to 1908. Germany has recognized for the first time that it committed genocide in Namibia during its colonial rule more than a century ago and promised financial support worth more than 1 billion euros. Which would be $1.2 billion to fund infrastructure projects in the African nation. German settlers killed thousands of Herero and Nama people between 1904 and 1908 after the tribes rebelled against Berlin's rule in the colony, then called German Southwest Africa. Survivors were driven into the desert where they, for many, they ended up in concentration camps to be used as slave labor, and many died from cold, malnutrition, and exhaustion. The German government has previously acknowledged moral responsibility, see these symbolic words, for the killings, but Berlin has avoided an official apology to ward off compensation claims as a gesture. Understand the insult in this, as a gesture to recognize the immense suffering inflicted on victims. Germany will also support the reconstruction and development of Namibia via a financial program of 1.1 billion euros. The sum will be paid over 30 years, according to sources close to the negotiations, and must primarily benefit the descendants of the Herero and Nama people. Moss, however, stopped short of referring to this as reparations, saying that the payment did not open the way to any legal request for compensation. I hope you guys are as furious as me with this, because this is what happens when you are given something without getting power, and that the people in power get to maintain their power. They get to set the terms. They get to say, we're going to give you this much. And this is not for any type of legal compensation. This is because we are doing this as a gesture. And you are going to accept that, because otherwise we're walking away from the table. It's a big insult to the people. And, thankfully, the people who actually were of the Nama, who were actually excluded of the deal, they have come out and said that this is not okay. So let's read from a follow-up article. It says, Laidla Peringanda, who is the chairperson of the Namibian Genocide Association, said that if the German government wants to reconcile, they need to give us our dignity back, he said. But that can't happen as long as they are excluding us. Well, what is he talking about? He's talking about Germany's announcement that it was going to acknowledge colonial area massacres as genocide. Descendants of the affected communities rejected the text of the joint declaration, which omitted the word reparations, and they said true reconciliation could not be achieved without their inclusion in the negotiations. So this is where the truth comes out. They're saying that this is for the genocide of the Herero and Nama people, but the actual people of those tribes were excluded from any of the negotiations. So the next question has to be, who was actually negotiating on behalf of the people? And more than likely, it's someone who wants Germany to treat them favorably or to not do anything that's going to jeopardize the neo-colonial relationship that exists between the different factions that exist in that country. Now, it says, we are worried about the social project proposed by the German government that will not benefit us. They said, if they are not including us in negotiations, how will they suddenly involve us when it comes to these projects, which is very true. We have lost our ancestral land. A lot of us are community. We live in poverty today. Some of us live in shacks and have to go without eating for a week. A lot of us inherited a transgenerational trauma. Understand the emphasis on land. How do you apologize for, this is not an apology for colonialism. This is an apology for an act that happened within the confines of colonialism. How do you apologize to the people when you still have their land? How do you apologize to the people where you still have their power? How do you apologize when you're telling them we have no intention of repairing the damage that is done? We just want to make sure that you're good while we continue the colonial relationship that has always existed. These are the contradictions that the colonials don't mind having, because they understand that their system is inherently one that is oppressive. And to them, continuing that oppression has to be by any means necessary. If they have to do these concessions, and if that will be something enough to make people feel happy enough to continue with the relationship, they'll do it. They'll do whatever is necessary to hold on to their power. And this is what Germany is doing here. Now, I do want to give some more perspective, though, because it should be understood that the land situation in Namibia is very much one that we see as a side of different settler colonies. And it's one that I didn't even realize was that severe. And it's one that I think that we don't pay attention to. I think we pay attention more so to South Africa, because South Africa is, or Zania, is the country that is, I would say, we get to see in the news more so talking about their land issues. But South Africa is not the only country dealing with these same land issues. Now, get this, white Namibians, okay, who descend from the former present colonizers, I would say, but former colonizers, Germany and South Africa, make up 6% of the population in Namibia, but they own 70% of the land. Let that resonate with you. These people are apologizing for a genocide, and they don't even feel enough conviction over the continual colonial relationship, because understand that colonial relationship allowed for the genocide. And if you're not going to do anything to change that, then why are we even negotiating to begin with? Why are the people starving? Why are the people sick? Why are the people without land? Why are the people without power? And you feel as though you can be the one to set the terms of what justice is. That's not justice, people. That is not justice. That is manipulation. And we have to understand that that is what the colonists are going to continue to do. They're not serious about reparations. We don't call this reparations. I saw some of my people calling this reparations. Do not call this reparations. This is a payoff. And reparations are not payoffs. They are a reversal of the situation. They are a reversal of the power situation, a true reparation, not a symbolic one. Because understand that you can't say that you're repairing something that happened during the colonial expansion throughout Africa, and then you want to keep the colonial system being intact. That's not reparations. So let this be a warning to our people. They did this not because they want to do anything right by the people. They did this because they want to continue their power. The same reason that Emmanuel Macron did what he did in Rwanda. And also, let's keep in mind, Rwanda is a very opportune place for the colonial powers to have a good relationship with, particularly Paul Kagame, who we know is very complicit with the Kobo and the Coltan mining inside of the Congo. So let's keep in mind that these are all power plays. And let's not treat these as anything close to justice. Hopefully, though, the more that our people start scrutinizing these people and start putting things together, we'll be in a better position to organize around power, because power is not going to come from asking. It's not going to come even from negotiating. Power comes from taking and seizing. And the people who are majority of the population, how is it possible for our people to be put inside of these constrained and confined neighborhoods, ghettos, while our colonial powers tell us that, oh, we're sorry, but we're going to keep your land. We're going to keep the power. That's not power. And so our people demand the land with the compensation and the self-determination. With that, we're going to continue to be a colonized people. So that's my thoughts on that. I'd like to hear your thoughts, and I will see you on the next video. Hey family, this is Tierney Cherie. I'm here to make an announcement that I'm very, very excited to make. I'm excited because I really think this is something that is important for our people. Otherwise, I would not have devoted so much time and energy towards it. So I finished my first book, and the book title is Fostering False Identity, the Child Welfare System's Design of Social Control of the Black Family. Now, why is this book something that I think will be very important for our community? Well, number one, it's dealing with the system of white supremacy, particularly the way that the system has targeted our children. If you don't know, our children are literally our future. Without our children, we have no future. And so understand that the system is very crafty when figuring out what to derail first. And to me, it's no mistake that the system particularly went after the Black family. If you look at what happened whenever we were enslaved by this system, and continues to go after the Black family, continues to go after Black children, continues to try to villainize African parents. So for that, I wanted to particularly talk about this subject. Now, the other thing that the book will deal with is our African identities. Why is it that our African identities are a threat to the system? Why is it that whenever we want to identify ourselves as being African, we get so much drawback inside of the Black community? I think a lot of us are not aware of the history of assimilationist thought inside of our community, this idea that we have to be close to white in order to be accepted. And so that's another subject that we delve into in this book. So I'm hoping that anyone who is, obviously, if you're a parent, a Black parent, and you really want to understand why it is that these systems are going after your children, I encourage you to read this book. I hope that it will arm you with a lot of knowledge and a lot of foresight, not just about how to protect your own children, but how to organize in your community, because that's really the purpose of the book, is to say that we have to organize among ourselves in order to protect ourselves from this white supremacist system. And then obviously, if you're an organizer in general, this is something that I think is important for you to read, because like I said, this is a subject in the Black community that we just don't discuss enough. Child welfare is not something that is going to get enough attention. People, obviously, will organize them around other causes, but this is one that is really important that I feel like we have to pay more attention to.